"Don't shoot. You'll ruin everything." The whisper was as soft as a moth's wing, yet it hit Daniel with the force of a physical blow. It was impossible, nonsensical. It cut through the roaring in his ears, a sound that had been building since he first saw her. His knuckles were white around the grip of his Colt. The hammer pulled back. The world narrowed to the bead of his front sight and the arrogant smirk on Matthias Barrett's face. The crowded market of Harmony Gulch held its breath, a collective gasp frozen in the hot, dusty Colorado air. The simple grammar of violence was about to be spoken, and he was ready to be its author. But the words from the girl, the very person he was about to save, had just torn the page from the book. He had arrived in town an hour earlier, a ghost returning to the place that had broken him. Harmony Gulch was a lie baked in adobe and false fronts, a town run by the iron fist of the Barrett family, a poison he knew by name. He'd been nursing a lukewarm beer in the saloon, listening to the town's nervous pulse when the commotion started outside. It was market day, a day for selling livestock, trading goods, and, apparently, for parading human beings. She was led through the crowd by a thick rope, her hands bound tightly in front of her. She was Apache. That much was clear from her high cheekbones, the proud, unbroken line of her jaw, and the long black hair that hung down her back like a sheet of polished obsidian. She wore a simple buckskin dress, worn but clean, adorned with a single, elegant concho belt of hammered silver. They were leading her like a prized mare to the auction block, a spectacle of casual cruelty designed to assert power. The man holding the rope was Matthias Barrett, the eldest son, his face flushed with the cheap authority that came with his family's name. The crowd parted, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, fear, and quiet shame. They were complicit in their silence. Daniel felt a cold, familiar rage begin to burn in his gut. It was the same rage he'd felt 10 years ago when the Barretts had legally repossessed his family's ranch, using a forged deed and a bought-off judge, leaving his father a broken man who died a year later. He had come back to Harmony Gulch for a reckoning, and fate, it seemed, had just handed him a cause. This girl was not just a stranger. She was a symbol of the Barretts' corruption, their belief that everything and everyone was for sale. Her public humiliation was an insult to the very idea of freedom, and her silent dignity was a defiance that called to the last shred of honor left in him. He watched as they tied her rope to the post on the auctioneer's platform, a place usually reserved for prize bulls. Matthias stood beside her, a wolf's grin on his face, ready to begin his foul business. That's when Daniel moved. He didn't run. He walked, his steps deliberate, the jingle of his spurs a slow death knell against the shocked silence. He pushed through the crowd, his eyes never leaving Matthias. He saw the flicker of recognition, then annoyance, in the Barrett heir's eyes. Daniel didn't stop until he was 20 feet from the platform. Then, in one smooth, practiced motion, his Colt was in his hand, cocked and aimed. "Let her go, Barrett." Daniel's voice was low, a dangerous rumble. Panic erupted. Women screamed. Men scrambled for cover. Matthias's grin faltered, replaced by a sneer of disbelief. "You! I thought you crawled out of this state years ago. You don't have the nerve." "The nerve's grown back," Daniel said. "Untie her. Now." He took a step closer, his aim unwavering. This was it. The moment of confrontation. He would force Barrett to back down, expose him as a coward in front of the whole town. Then he would free the girl. It was simple. It was just... But as he moved within arm's length of the platform, the Apache girl turned her head. Just enough. Her dark eyes locking with his. There was no fear in them. No plea for help. There was only a fierce, urgent intelligence. And then came the whisper. "Don't shoot. You'll ruin everything." Confusion crashed over him, dousing the fire of his rage. Ruin everything? What could be worse than this? He faltered, the certainty of his actions shattering. Her eyes held his, pleading with him not with fear, but with a desperate, hidden logic he couldn't comprehend. She was playing a different game, one with rules he didn't know. To save her now, in his way, would be to destroy hers. Matthias, sensing the shift, regained his confidence. "See? Even the savage knows her place. Now get out of here before I have the sheriff hang you for vagrancy." The moment was lost. To fire now would be to ignore her plea. To trample on a sacrifice he didn't understand. To lower the gun was to accept public defeat, to be seen as a coward who backed down. He chose the latter. With a slow, agonizing reluctance that felt like swallowing glass, he uncocked the hammer and holstered his Colt. A collective sigh of relief and scorn rippled through the crowd. He had lost. He stood there, exposed and humiliated, as Matthias laughed. The girl, Nita, as he would later learn her name was, never looked at him again. She straightened her back, her face becoming an unreadable mask of stoicism as she was purchased in a mock sale by another one of the Barretts and led away toward their large, imposing mansion on the hill. Daniel was left alone in the center of the market, the dust settling around him. He came seeking vengeance, a clear and simple path. Instead, he had stumbled into a mystery, a captive who refused to be saved, leaving him with a single burning question that was far more complicated than revenge. Why? Luxury was its own form of prison. Nita learned this in her first hours within the Barrett mansion. The room they put her in had no bars, only a large, clean glass window that looked out onto a meticulously manicured garden. The floor was polished oak, gleaming like lake water, reflecting the image of a captive in a buckskin dress. A great bed with pristine white silk sheets occupied one corner. She had not touched it. Instead, she sat on the thick Persian rug, her back straight, silent as a stone in a stream. The silence in this house was the heaviest shackle, a quiet woven from power and contempt. The door opened without a knock. Elias Barrett entered, the patriarch of the clan. He was nothing like his son, where Matthias wore his brutality with childish swagger. Elias possessed the cold, calculated stillness of a snake that has lived a very long time. He was tall and thin, dressed in an expensive black suit, his gray eyes assessing her not as a person, but as a piece that had just been placed on the board. "My dear, I trust my son's theatrics in the market were not too distressing," he said, his voice smooth, but utterly devoid of warmth. That was a necessary message for those who needed to hear it. "Here, we are more civilized." Nita did not reply. She stared at a point on the wall beyond him, her heart beating a slow, deliberate rhythm. Her silence was her only armor. Elias seemed unconcerned. He circled the room, his fingers ghosting over a mahogany desk. "Your people are being stubborn about the water rights to the South River. They cling to an old treaty, a worthless piece of paper. The federal government, however, has a soft spot for sentimental appeals." He stopped and looked directly at her. "Your presence here, as our guest, will serve as a potent reminder to your elders that cooperation is far more profitable than conflict." A political pawn. It was exactly as she had surmised, but she would not be a passive one. "Everything you need will be provided," Elias concluded. "We ask only for your decorum." His eyes drifted to her waist, his gaze lingering for a second on the single, intricately stamped silver disc at the center of her belt. It was a solitary silver concho, bright against the dark leather. He made no comment on it, but Nita felt the weight of that glance. The concho on her hip seemed to grow heavier, a dull ache that reminded her of her purpose, of the price she was willing to pay. When Elias left, closing the door firmly behind him, Nita finally allowed herself a long, shuddering breath. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in a cheap boarding house on the edge of town, the shame burning hotter than the whiskey in his hand. The laughter of the market crowd still echoed in his ears. He had walked in like a storm of vengeance and walked out a fool. He had let a girl beg him not to save her, and he had obeyed. Why? The question was a jagged shard in his mind. He had seen defiance in her eyes, not surrender. She wasn't broken. She was executing a plan. The urge to ride back to the Barrett mansion, guns blazing, was immense. But he knew that would only get her killed. No. Vengeance by force was a blunt instrument. He needed to understand. He needed to know why she had chosen that cage. He left the boarding house and wandered the town, its dusty alleys painfully familiar. He needed information, and he knew he couldn't go to the bought-and-paid-for sheriff. He needed someone on the fringes, someone who hated the Barretts, but was too scared or too smart to show it. His mind went to an old man named Silas, a silversmith whose small shop was tucked away on a side street. Silas had made a silver locket for his mother years ago and had been one of the few to offer quiet condolences when Daniel's family lost everything. Daniel found Silas hunched over his workbench, eyes squinted behind thick spectacles as he etched a piece of silver. The shop smelled of metal, polish, and time. Silas looked up as Daniel entered, recognition slowly dawning on his wrinkled face. "Daniel," the old man said, his voice a dry rasp. "Figured you'd left this place in the dust for good." "So did I," Daniel admitted. He cut straight to the chase. "I was at the market today. The Apache girl." Silas sighed and set his tools down. "A shameful business. The Barretts grow bolder." "She was wearing a belt," Daniel said, watching the silversmith's face carefully, "with a single concho in the middle, round, with a pattern." Silas frowned, his memory sifting through a lifetime's archive. "A concho, you say? Was it stamped with the image of a hawk circling within a sun ring?" Daniel froze. He'd only had a glimpse, but the description felt right. "Yes. Does it mean something?" Silas leaned forward, lowering his voice. "That's no common piece of jewelry, son. That is the mark of the word keeper. It's passed down a specific line. The one who wears it is not a chief, but they are the one entrusted by the tribe to speak truth in council. They are the conscience of their people. Their word carries the weight of a sacred oath." He looked Daniel square in the eye. "That concho isn't an ornament. It's a promise. It means that girl is representing every soul in her tribe. It's a burden. A burden." The word resonated in Daniel's mind, finally providing a piece of the puzzle. She wasn't a random victim. She was chosen. Her presence in the Barrett mansion wasn't a capture. It was a parley, albeit one held under duress. Her whisper, "Don't save me," wasn't a plea of surrender. It was an instruction. He would have been interfering in a sacred rite, an act of sacrifice he had no right to interrupt. He understood what was at stake, but he still didn't understand why her sacrifice was the only answer. The past was a ghost that lived in the dry bed of the Harmony River. For Daniel, it was a place of pilgrimage and pain. 10 years ago, this river had been the lifeblood of his family's ranch. Now, it was a wide, sun-bleached scar of cracked earth and thirsty stones, a testament to the Barretts' greed. After they had seized his family's land, they had built a dam upstream, diverting the water to their own vast holdings and choking the life from every smaller ranch downstream. Standing there now, under the oppressive heat of the Colorado sun, Daniel felt the old, cold fury stir. This dry riverbed was the scene of the crime, the physical evidence of the life that had been stolen from him. It was here that he had found his father, months after losing the ranch, staring at the empty expanse, a man whose spirit had already left his body. This was the memory that fueled him. He was so lost in the ghost of the past that he almost missed the rider in the present. A lone figure on horseback was making his way down from the direction of the Barrett mansion, heading south toward the foothills where the Apache lands began. The rider was one of the Barretts' hired men, his face hard and impassive. Daniel ducked behind a cluster of salt cedars, his instincts taking over. The man wasn't riding fast. He was carrying a message, not running from a fight. Daniel watched until the rider was a small speck in the distance, a message for Nita's tribe. The Barretts were making their move. The thought of Nita being forced to condemn her own people sent a fresh wave of frustration through him. Her sacrifice was beginning to look less like a strategy, and more like a surrender. Inside the mansion, Nita stood at the window, watching the same rider disappear toward the lands of her family. Elias Barrett stood behind her, his presence a cold weight in the room. On the desk lay a piece of parchment. It was a formal request, written in elegant script, for the Apache elders to attend a meeting at the Barrett Dam. The purpose, it stated, was to finalize the transfer of water rights. Beside the parchment was a single, freshly cut eagle feather. "Your courier will deliver the message," Elias said smoothly. "But a message from me is just a threat. A message from you, that is an appeal for peace." He gestured to the eagle feather. "A symbol of sincerity, they will understand." Nita looked at the feather, then back out the window. Her face was a mask of calm, but inside, her heart was a stone. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the first step in her terrible bargain. To protect her family, she had to betray her tribe. To save the one, she had to sacrifice the many. This was the weight of the silver concho on her hip, the burden that Daniel could never have understood. It wasn't just about water rights anymore. It was about a life. She picked up the feather, her fingers steady and sure, tucked it into the leather pouch that the rider would carry. She did not look at Elias. She did not need to see the triumphant gleam in his eyes. In that moment, she was truly the word keeper, speaking a truth that was a lie, her silence a scream of sacrifice. She was solidifying her role, not as a pawn, but as a player who was willing to lose the game to protect her king. Days later, Daniel found his answer in the bottom of a whiskey glass. He was back in the saloon, listening to the loose talk of frustrated ranchers and off-duty farmhands. The Barrett's man had returned from the Apache lands, and the whispers started to fly. The Apache elders had agreed to the meeting. It was an unheard-of concession. "They're giving up the river," one rancher grumbled into his beer. "Just like that, something's not right." "It's that Apache girl they've got up at the mansion," another added, his voice low and conspiratorial. "They say she's the chief's daughter. Barrett's holding her to ransom." The words, though factually incorrect, struck a chord in Daniel. Ransom. It fit. But it wasn't for land or water. It had to be for something more. The memory of Nita's eyes, her urgent whisper, came back to him. "Don't shoot. You'll ruin everything." He had been the wild card, the unpredictable element that could have toppled her carefully constructed sacrifice. He left the saloon, a new, desperate idea taking hold. He needed confirmation. He needed to see her. But the Barrett mansion was a fortress. Getting in was impossible. But perhaps he didn't need to get in. He needed to get close. That night, cloaked in darkness, he made his way up the hill toward the mansion. He moved like a shadow, years of tracking bounties having taught him the art of invisibility. He circled the sprawling property, studying its layout, the patrol routes of the 2 guards, the locations of the lamps. He found her window. It was on the ground floor, dark now, facing the manicured garden. It was the only room on that side of the house that was kept lit until late, a golden cage in the vast darkness. He waited, hidden in the deep shadows of a large oak tree, his patience a hunter's virtue. He waited for the house to fall silent, for the guards to grow complacent. He waited for a ghost of a chance. The diversion had to be subtle enough to draw attention, but not so alarming as to cause a lockdown. An hour past midnight, when the moon was hidden behind a thick bank of clouds, Daniel put his plan into motion. He crept to the far side of the estate, to the stables that sat 100 yards from the main house. With a piece of flint and steel, he lit a small, carefully prepared bundle of dry hay he'd placed near the stable's rear wall. He didn't want a raging inferno, just smoke. Thick, acrid smoke that would rise into the night sky and create a believable panic. He was back in the shadows of the oak tree near Nita's window before the first shout erupted. "Fire at the stables!" As predicted, the 2 guards abandoned their patrol routes, their dutiful boredom instantly replaced by adrenaline-fueled urgency as they ran toward the glowing plume of smoke. Lights flickered on in the main house. Shouted orders echoed in the night. The entire household's attention was now focused on the perceived threat to their valuable horses. Daniel had his window of opportunity. It would be short. He sprinted from the shadows to the wall of the house, pressing himself flat against the cold stone beneath Nita's window. The glass was an impenetrable barrier. He couldn't risk breaking it. He tapped on the pane, a soft, rhythmic drumming of his fingernails. Tap, tap, tap. A sound that could be mistaken for a branch in the wind. He waited, his heart pounding against his ribs, for a terrible moment. He thought she was asleep, that his entire gamble had been for nothing. Then, a shadow moved inside the room. Nita's silhouette appeared at the window. He could see her press her face close to the glass, her eyes searching the darkness. He tapped again, more urgently this time. She saw him. Her reaction wasn't fear, but a sharp, almost angry flinch. She glanced over her shoulder, back toward the door of her room, then looked back at him. She slid the heavy window sash upward, just an inch. It was a risk, a monumental breach of her silent compliance. The sliver of an opening was all he needed. The cool night air rushed into her gilded cage. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice a fierce, angry hiss. "Are you insane? They will kill you." "They're a little busy right now," he whispered back, nodding in the direction of the stables. "I had to talk to you. I had to know why." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "The ranchers think you're the chief's daughter, that you were ransomed for water rights. But that's not it, is it? A word keeper wouldn't trade their people's future for their own life." Her composure finally cracked. In the faint, flickering light from the distant fire, he saw a wave of anguish pass over her face. The mask of stoicism was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that was far more captivating than her defiance. "You know of the word keeper? I know the concho on your belt isn't just for decoration," he pressed. "I know you're making a sacrifice, but it's a bad trade. Nita, the river is life. Your people can't survive without it." Tears welled in her eyes, shining like obsidian in the darkness. Her carefully constructed walls were crumbling. The secret she had carried alone was becoming too heavy to bear. "It is not my life I am trading," she finally confessed, the words torn from her. "It is my honor, my name, my place among my people." "For what?" Daniel demanded, his voice still a low whisper. What could be worth that? She took a shuddering breath, the truth pouring out in a torrent of hushed, desperate words. My brother, his name is Taza. He is only 10 summers old. The Barretts don't have him here. They took him weeks ago, during a raid they disguised as bandits. They hold him at their old ranch, deep in the canyons. No one knows he is there. No one knows he is even alive. The confession landed like a physical blow. It wasn't about land or water. It was about a child. My parents believe he was killed in the raid, she continued, her voice breaking. Only I know the truth. Elias Barrett showed me proof, my brother's hunting knife. He told me Taza would remain unharmed as long as I played my part. As long as my people peacefully surrender their rights, their land, their future. My compliance is the only thing keeping my brother alive. If I resist, if I try to escape, they will send me his scalp. The sheer, monstrous cruelty of the Barretts' plan was breathtaking. They had created the perfect prison, one where the captive policed herself, where the key was the life of a loved one. Nita's whisper in the market, "Don't save me," now made perfect, horrifying sense. His rescue would have been Taza's death sentence. Daniel's world shifted on its axis. His quest, which had begun as a selfish thirst for personal revenge, was suddenly insignificant, childish. The ghost of his own family's ruin paled in comparison to the immediate, terrible stakes of Nita's ordeal. This was no longer about his past. It was about her future, and the future of her brother. My sacrifice, she said, the word now tasting like ash in her mouth, is to make my people hate me. I will be the word keeper who spoke a lie, the one who sold them into poverty, so that my brother might see another sunrise. He looked at her, at the immense strength it took to bear that burden, to choose shame over an innocent's life. His desire for blind revenge evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He could not be a storm. He had to be a scalpel. They made a mistake, Daniel whispered, his voice now filled with a new, deadly purpose. They showed you proof he's alive. That means we can get him back. Nita stared at him, a flicker of impossible hope igniting in her eyes. How? Their ranch is a fortress. Every fortress has a crack, he said. You've been playing their game. It's time they started playing ours. The shouts from the stable were dying down. His time was up. Don't lose hope. I'll be back. He melted back into the shadows, just as the guards, smelling of smoke but satisfied the fire was out, began their slow, meandering patrol back toward the house. The brief connection was severed. But in that small exchange, through a barred window, something fundamental had changed. The would-be savior and the captive who refused to be saved had become allies. Their shared secret was now a shared weapon. The meeting at the window changed the nature of Nita's captivity. Before, it had been a passive endurance, a silent, solitary suffering. Now, it was an active battlefront. The oppressive silence of the mansion was no longer a cage. It was a hunting ground. Her grief, once a paralytic weight, now honed itself into a sharp, cold weapon. Every moment inside the Barretts' fortress became an opportunity for reconnaissance. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a spy. She began to move through the house. At first, she was always escorted, a silent shadow trailing behind a maid or Matthias Barrett himself. But her compliance was so perfect, her demeanor so utterly broken and submissive, that they grew careless. They began to allow her to walk unattended in the garden, then in the house's library. They mistook her quiet observation for defeated apathy. It was a fatal miscalculation. She listened. She learned the rhythms of the household, when Elias met with his business partners, the delivery schedules for supplies, the names of the men who worked the remote ranch where Taza was held. Her mind, trained to remember the detailed oral histories of her people, became a ledger of the Barretts' operations. She committed every detail to memory: a stray comment about a weak fence on the north pasture of the ranch, a complaint from a hired man about a faulty lock on a cellar door, a map left carelessly open on Elias's desk showing the patrol routes around the property. Daniel, meanwhile, had vanished from Harmony Gulch. To the Barretts and the townspeople, the would-be hero had been thoroughly humiliated and had slunk away with his tail between his legs. This was exactly what he wanted them to believe. In reality, he was living in the harsh wilderness of the foothills, a ghost moving through the canyons. He spent his days observing the Barrett ranch from a high, hidden ridge, sketching its layout in the dirt, his patience absolute. He was no longer a man fueled by rage, but a strategist mapping out a battlefield. Their clandestine meetings became a dangerous, intricate dance. Once a week, under the cover of a moonless night. Daniel would repeat his diversion, never a fire in the same place twice, sometimes a spooked horse, once a cleverly tossed stone that broke a window in the servants' quarters. The brief moments of chaos were all they had. He would appear at her window, a shadow within shadows, and she would feed him the information she had gathered. 4 guards at the ranch, she whispered one night, her breath fogging the cold glass between them. 2 patrol, 2 stay in the main house. They are lazy. They drink after the sun sets. Another night, she told him. A supply wagon arrives every 3rd day. It brings food and whiskey. It is the only vehicle that comes and goes without being thoroughly searched. These whispered exchanges, fraught with the constant peril of discovery, forged a bond between them that was deeper than words. It was an alliance built not on affection, but on a shared, desperate purpose. He began to see beyond the stoic wordkeeper and glimpsed the terrified older sister. She began to see beyond the vengeful cowboy and discovered a man of surprising cunning and fierce loyalty. They never spoke of the future, of what might happen after. The after was a luxury they couldn't afford. There was only the mission. The silver concho on her belt became a symbol of her dual role. To the Barretts, it was a quaint, meaningless artifact. To her, it was a constant, heavy reminder of the lie she was telling her people. But in the secret darkness of her alliance with Daniel, it began to feel like something else, a symbol of a deeper promise, a secret pact to restore a stolen future. Its weight was no longer just a burden, it was a resolve. The turning point came on a cool evening, a month into her captivity. Elias Barrett, pleased with the progress of his plan and the impending capitulation of the Apache elders, had become arrogant. He was hosting a dinner for a potential investor, a wealthy industrialist from the East. Nita was ordered to serve them, to be a living, breathing display of his power over the savages. She moved silently around the dining room, pouring wine, her face an unreadable mask, but her ears were open. Elias, trying to impress his guest, began to boast. "The key to this entire valley," Elias said, swirling the red wine in his glass, "isn't just controlling the water. It's owning the land it flows through. My original claim, the one this entire enterprise is built on, was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. The territorial surveyor at the time was a drunk. For the right price, he was willing to misread his own maps, shifting the boundary line a full 2 miles west. Gave me the entire riverbed. The original survey map, the real one, is locked away in the county records office, buried under a mountain of dust. No one has looked at it in 20 years. Nita's heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression remained serene. She refilled the investor's glass, her hand perfectly steady, A fraudulent land claim. A buried map. It was the crack in the fortress Daniel had been looking for. It was a truth that could shatter the Barretts' entire empire, a legal weapon far more powerful than any gun. That night, when Daniel appeared at the window, the air crackled with a new energy. "The county records office," she whispered, relaying Elias's boast word for word. "The original survey map." A slow smile spread across Daniel's face in the darkness. It wasn't a smile of humor, but of a predator that has just caught the scent of its prey. He had been planning a rescue based on stealth and force, but Nita had just handed him the key to a checkmate. He could not only save her brother, he could tear down the entire House of Barrett from its very foundation. "Your sacrifice is almost over," he promised her. "It's time to bring the truth into the light." The county records office was a dusty mausoleum of forgotten truths. It was housed in the back of the Harmony Gulch courthouse, a cramped, neglected room overseen by a single, elderly clerk named Mr. Abernathy, a man who seemed to be made of the same brittle, yellowed paper as the documents he guarded. Daniel knew that walking in and asking for a 20-year-old survey map would raise immediate alarms. The clerk, like everyone else in a position of minor authority, was terrified of the Barretts. He needed a reason, a legal, undeniable reason, for Abernathy to retrieve the map for him. He found his pretext in the ghost of his own past. Daniel spent 2 days in the next county over, paying a lawyer with the last of his money to draft a formal petition. It was a long shot, a legal challenge to the foreclosure of his family's ranch based on a claim of procedural error. It was a document designed to fail, but its purpose was singular. It required the court to produce the original survey maps of the land in question from the year of the foreclosure. It was a bureaucratic key to unlock the dusty cage where the Barretts' original sin was buried. When he filed the petition at the Harmony Gulch courthouse, the presiding judge, a man Daniel knew was in Elias Barrett's pocket, scoffed. "This is frivolous, boy, a waste of the court's time." "It's my right as a citizen to file it," Daniel stated calmly, his demeanor respectful but firm. "And it is the court's duty to follow procedure. I am formally requesting all relevant documents be brought forward for a preliminary hearing." The judge, bound by the very laws he so often bent, had no choice but to comply, lest he draw unwanted attention from territorial authorities. He reluctantly ordered Mr. Abernathy to unearth the records. The hearing was set for 2 days later. It was a small victory, but it set the clock ticking. Daniel knew that as soon as Elias got wind of the petition, he would realize what Daniel was truly after. The window to act was closing fast. The night before the hearing, Daniel met Nita one last time. The air was thick with a tense, final act energy. "Tomorrow," he whispered, pressed close to the window. "When the hearing starts, Elias will be there. He won't be able to resist watching me be humiliated. It will draw most of his key men into town. That's our chance. The supply wagon you told me about. I'll be driving it." He explained the plan. It was daring, bordering on suicidal. He would take the place of the regular driver, using the wagon as a Trojan horse to get inside the ranch compound. Once inside, he would find Taza. "How will you find him?" Nita asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "You told me the cellar had a faulty lock," he reminded her, a callback to the precious intelligence she had gathered. "That's where they'd keep someone they want hidden. It's the most secure place." He looked at her, his expression serious. "The hardest part is for you. You can't be here when they discover he's gone. When the hearing is over, you have to find a way to escape the mansion in the confusion. Head straight for the old mission ruins in the foothills. Wait for me there." He was asking her to have blind faith, to abandon her post and run to a rendezvous point with no guarantee he would even be alive to meet her. She simply nodded, her trust in him absolute. The next day, the courtroom was tense. Elias Barrett sat in the front row, a smug, predatory smile on his face, flanked by his son Matthias and two of his toughest men. He had come to witness the final, pathetic gasp of the boy whose family he had destroyed. Daniel stood before the judge, calm and collected. Mr. Abernathy, looking nervous, brought out a stack of dusty ledgers and rolled up maps, placing them on a table. As you can see, the judge began, his voice dripping with condescension. The foreclosure was executed perfectly legally. As the judge droned on, Daniel's mind was miles away, in the canyons. At that very moment, the real supply wagon driver was tied up, gagged, and sleeping soundly in a line shack after being ambushed an hour earlier. Daniel, wearing the man's hat and coat, was steering a wagon laden with whiskey and flour along the winding dirt road to the Barrett ranch. He arrived at the gate. The two guards, recognizing the familiar wagon, barely gave him a second glance. "You're late, Jed," one of them grumbled. "Had a loose wheel," Daniel mumbled, keeping his head down. They waved him through. He was in. He followed the routine he'd observed for weeks, pulling the wagon up to the back of the ranch house. As he began to unload the supplies, he saw them. Two other guards, sitting on the porch, a bottle of whiskey already open between them, just as Nita had said they would be. He worked slowly, his heart hammering, waiting for his moment. Back in the courtroom, the judge unrolled the first map. This is the official town plat, as recorded after the survey. Daniel saw his chance. The guards on the porch were distracted, laughing at a crude joke. He slipped away from the wagon and around the side of the house to the slanted cellar doors. He pulled on the heavy wooden doors. The lock was old and rusted. He put his shoulder into it and shoved. With a groan of splintering wood, the lock broke. He peered down into the darkness, his Colt now in his hand. "Taza," he whispered into the gloom. A small sound came from the corner. A shuffling. A small figure, thin and pale, with large, dark eyes full of fear, looked up at him. It was him. In the courtroom, the judge, growing impatient, unrolled the final, largest map, the original territorial survey. He spread it out on the table, and suddenly, the room fell silent. The fraudulent line, drawn in a different ink, was clumsily obvious. The original boundary, marked by the official surveyor's seal, was a full 2 miles east of the Barretts Dam. The map didn't just prove Daniel's long-dead case. It proved that the entire Barrett Empire, their wealth, their power, their control of the valley, was built on a single, audacious lie. Elias Barrett shot to his feet, his face turning a shade of purple. "This is a forgery, a trick." But it was too late. The truth was out, unrolled for all to see. The ranchers and townsfolk in the back of the courtroom began to murmur, the sound growing into an angry roar. The foundation of their world had just been exposed as quicksand. Chaos erupted. In that moment, the Barretts' power, which had always relied on an illusion of legality and fear, simply evaporated. In the confusion, Nita, who had been watching from the doorway, slipped away unnoticed, miles away. Daniel lifted the small, trembling boy out of the darkness and into the sunlight. Taza clung to him, too scared to speak. Daniel carried him to the wagon, hid him under a pile of empty grain sacks, and calmly drove back toward the gate. The guards, oblivious to the drama unfolding in town and their empty cellar, waved him out. The rescue was complete. The unraveling had begun. The mission ruins were a skeleton of faith bleached white by the sun. Nita waited there, her back against the warm adobe of a crumbling wall. The silence of the foothills a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind in town. She did not know if she was waiting for a rescue or for news of a tragedy. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The role of the passive wordkeeper was gone, shed like a skin. But the new role of a woman hoping in the face of despair was a far heavier burden. The silver concho on her belt felt cold against her skin, no longer a symbol of sacrifice or alliance, but a question mark. She saw the dust trail first, a faint plume rising against the vast blue canvas of the sky. A single rider. Her heart seized in her chest. Was it him, or was it one of them? A harbinger of failure. She stood up, her hand instinctively going to her waist. Though she had no weapon, she would not be taken easily. As the rider drew closer, she recognized the loping, steady gait of Daniel's horse, and then she saw it. A small shape seated in front of him, clinging to the saddle horn. It was Taza. The relief that washed over her was so immense it buckled her knees. She sank back against the wall, tears blurring her vision. A single choked sob escaping her lips. It was the first sound of personal emotion she had allowed herself in months. Daniel rode right up to the wall and slid from his horse. He gently lifted Taza down, and the boy, seeing his sister, ran into her arms. They held each other, a small island of reunion in a sea of wilderness, whispering Apache words of comfort and love. Daniel stood back, giving them their moment. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by the events of the past few days. He had done it. He had rescued the boy and exposed the lie. He had won. But as he watched Nita clutch her brother, he felt a strange, hollow ache. His vengeance was complete. The ghost of his father had been appeased. The Barretts were ruined, their fraudulent empire collapsing under the weight of truth as the town they had terrorized turned on them. But what now? The rage that had driven him for a decade was gone, and he felt oddly empty in its absence. When Nita finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with a gratitude that was deeper than any ocean, the emptiness began to recede. "You kept your promise," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me the map," he replied simply. It had not been his victory alone. It was theirs. They stayed at the mission for 2 days, allowing Taza to recover his strength, sharing the provisions Daniel had brought. They spoke little, but the silence was now comfortable, companionable. The tension of their shared mission was gone, replaced by the quiet uncertainty of the future. The alliance forged in shadow and whispers had served its purpose. And now they were just a man and a woman, standing at a crossroads, On the third morning, a small party of riders appeared on the horizon, approaching slowly, peacefully. They were Apache warriors, sent by the elders, Nita's people, having heard of the chaos in Harmony Gulch and the fall of the Barretts, had sent a search party for their wordkeeper. Nita stood to greet them, Taza holding her hand. She was no longer the shamed outcast she had prepared to be. She was the one who had endured, who had sacrificed, and who had, through a secret alliance, helped free her people from the Barretts' stranglehold. She would return, not in disgrace, but as a hero with a complex story to tell. Her name forever woven into the legend of their tribe's survival. She turned to Daniel one last time. The 2 paths before her were clear. She could return to her people, to the life she knew, to her responsibilities as a wordkeeper and a sister. Or there was another path, an unknown one, represented by the quiet man standing before her. "Will you come with us?" she asked, the question hanging in the still air. "My people will honor you. You would have a home." Daniel looked from her face to the proud warriors waiting on their horses, then to the vast, open horizon that stretched out behind them. He had come to Harmony Gulch to close a chapter of his past. He had never considered what the next one might be. To ride with them would be to find a new family, a new purpose. To decline would be to embrace the lonely freedom he had always known. The victory over the Barretts had not brought him the simple peace he expected. It had only brought him to another, more profound choice. He looked at Nita, at the strength and courage that had captivated him from the moment he saw her. He had saved her brother, but she, in a way, had saved him from the ghost he was becoming. What did true justice really cost? Perhaps, he realized, its final price wasn't paid in revenge, but in the choice one makes the morning after the battle is won. He began, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't have an answer. And so, the story ends not with a gunshot, but with a question. It leaves them there, under the wide Colorado sky, a woman facing her future and a man finally freed from his past, with two divergent paths leading away from the embers of a single, shared fire. A choice to be made. A new story waiting to be written.